What is going on, Diesel Nation? We're excited to have you guys with us today on the Diesel Podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube and aren't subscribed, make sure and click the subscribe button, like, comment. Let us know what you think of the episode. If you have other questions about the topic or you'd like to hear from a particular guest, let us know. We're always checking comments on there. Love to hear from you guys. On today's episode, I'm going to be joined by a Diesel Podcast listener. He had reached out to us, and he operates a semi truck, and he wanted to chat with us about challenges that they face in that market with emission systems, fuel costs, the cost of vehicles, longevity of them. And I really wanted to learn more. I don't know a lot about it, and I was really curious to see how emissions have impacted those vehicles. Then also maybe what the future holds for being able to get more efficiency out of them, and if that's going to kind of trickle down to the pickup truck market. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation. I look forward to it. Before we get to it, though, I want to remind you guys, if you're in the market for a knife, Kershaw Knives has 20% off for Diesel Podcast listeners. Just use code Diesel20 at kershaw.kiausa.com. It's a great way to save money on a knife for EDC, or hunting, fishing, work, around the house. They've got a ton of different choices to meet any budget, that you might have. So if you need something that you're just going to throw in a toolbox, going to bounce around, or you're an enthusiast and are looking for a particular type of either steel or like blade handle, anything like that, they've got a ton of different choices for you. All right, let's get to today's podcast with Christopher and chatting about semi-trucks, emissions, how reliable the new ones may be compared to the old ones, and what the future may hold for the big rig market. Christopher, welcome to the Diesel Podcast. I really was looking forward to this episode for quite a while when you had messaged us on Instagram, and I think it was around the time we were talking about like emissions and different things with the pickup trucks, and you're in the heavy duty semi truck segment, and I thought it'd be really cool to chat with you, learn more about that, and see how there's a lot of things in common that both pickup trucks and semi trucks have, and even some differences and some innovations on that side. So welcome to the podcast. Look forward to our chat today.
Yes, sir. Glad to be on here. Looking forward to this conversation, and hopefully we can get some helpful information and help some people out here.
Yeah, I admittedly I know very little, so I'm just going to be kind of like a sponge asking you questions. So I wanted to start with your background in in the diesel industry, in the career you have. Tell us a little bit about that, how you got started, and I think that'll really kind of segue into our topic about emissions and heavy duty trucks and what the future of those hold.
Yes, sir. I'm a diesel enthusiast. I've been running big rigs for about 5 years. Run a 12 valve as a daily driver as well, and part of one of my major hobbies is keeping abreast to the regulations and innovations and ideas out there on both sides of the big rigs and the medium duty trucks, and seeing what we're doing to bring diesel back to the forefront and making it more reliable and more efficient.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the big thing on the truck side, the pickup truck side, is the efficiency and the longevity, which I know I've mentioned before on the podcast, but it's one of the core reasons people buy a diesel pickup truck is they want to get 300, 400, 500. I know some want 7,
Yep.
800, a million
Yep.
miles on them, and they're expensive, but we like how robust they are, how strong the engines are, and everything else that goes along with it. And I know when the DPFs and EGRs came out, and I'd say it even persists today, is the truck owner will think, is this going to lessen the longevity of my diesel pickup truck? What are some challenges or things that I'm going to be presented with that maybe I didn't have on my 12 valve or my LB7?
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think this is kind of my perception a little bit is on the semi truck side. I think this stuff kind of hits first. I think um, emissions and compliance and longevity and all those things are so crucial on that side with how important it is to the economy, the country, getting goods, all over.
Yep.
It's kind of next level with that stuff.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. When emissions first came out in, '07 and made it mandatory, it was as a couple episodes back, it was a scramble to really push the market to develop something that was reliable and didn't grenade going down the highway. And it's come a long way, and see, it's been 15 years since they first introduced emissions. And the stuff today, yeah, we still complain. There's still problems that they're working out, but the kind of the problems do cross over in the cost of the repairs and the DPF systems and the weight problems and just the complication of the systems. But where it really kind of shows the difference is here in the US versus like in Europe. Europe is much more of a diesel market than we are. Diesel cars, regular size diesel trucks are much more commonplace. And then big rigs, they have a higher emission standard, but they don't rely on DPF systems near as much. So what they've been doing in the last about 5-10 years, and you've seen big jumps in the VGT turbos made a big difference in the emissions with how big the motors that we run are. And then on top of that, they've done a lot of fuel mapping and fine tuning it, kind of like Koenigsegg with the 3-cylinder motors, where they're super precise, so they can build a ton of horsepower with very minimal fuel consumption. That's what they're doing over in Europe, and we're kind of lagging behind. But that's why the Volvos are really pulling ahead in the efficiency and the power and minimizing breakdowns. They're really starting to focus on the drivetrain loss in the transmission, the tires, the rear ends, and they're working on getting close to double-digit fuel mileage in big rigs. May not sound like a lot, but my trip today, I averaged 6 miles to the gallon in my big rig, and they're pushing 9.5, 10 reliably. It adds up. It really does. And so Volvo is one of the leading companies in the big rig sector that is pushing the efficiency and trying to match the reliability as well. And one of the issues that they're running into is the cost, because it goes back to the EPA with their arbitrary regulations and need to meddle in things that don't need meddling. They're really focusing on the pre-exhaust efficiency.
Yeah.
Low drag tires, higher geared rear ends, fine-tuned transmissions. You can only get so fine-tuned with a 12-speed as an automatic, but they're really making headway in that, which in turn is creating this kind of a vacuum effect with the whole industry of forcing the American-made companies, because we like things big, we like things noisy, and a lot of times we like them, smoky as well. So, but the ability that they're able to put out now, just the sheer numbers that they've been running on the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now, has really started to help the market in the efficiency and be able to not only push back against the EPA, but render them not as necessary to show we can do things at a higher efficiency, less emissions, more power, and maintain the reliability of it. And that's really, I like it, even though I'm old school. It makes it to where if I don't have to fight with the EPA, I won't, to make, what I need. If I'm towing heavy, if I'm wanting to drag, it's really been helpful to, you know, I don't have to beat them. I just have to compete with their usefulness.
Now,
Um,
with the big rigs in Europe, you had mentioned a little bit about them being not as dependent on the DPF. So, do they have DPFs over there, or is it more passive than, say, what we're used to here with active regens and passive
it's
regens?
yeah, it's more passive. It's more if I remember right, the early Duramaxes ran, it wasn't as reliable, but it was more of a high temperature constant filtration system. DPF system without the DEF fluid. And that's similar that's modern technology similar to that today. And they're able to they were really pushed to that because of the necessity that they needed the highest efficiency because of the sheer cost. Because here, I'm looking at it's 478 a gallon of diesel here, but that's how much it costs for a liter in Europe. So out of necessity, they really jacked up their efficiency and the reliability, but the DPF was still because you have the treaties and the global pacts for emissions. That's basically what they were founding off of for, okay, yes, we do have some sort of after treatment system to comply with international standards. But kind of like what Volkswagen had the problem with here with their diesels, they don't have that over there of they can run their efficiency as high as possible, and then they just have to make their compliance a formality.
That makes sense. Now, with the big rig side, like in 2007 and those early models, were they as plagued with issues as the pickup trucks were? And I don't necessarily know how much Duramax trucks were, but I know the 6.4 struggled a little bit early on. The 6.7
Yeah.
Cummins as well. Was it kind of the same thing there with just kind of working the bugs out a little bit?
They were for the first year and a half, 2 years, you'd be surprised at how many people took the 50, 60, $70,000 and swapped motors. Caterpillar was still a huge thing. People were pissed that they left the truck market at that point in time. So there's a lot of rigs still running around that are '07, '08, '09 that are cat swapped or C15 swapped. And then that really fell off once they hit about end of 2009, 2010. They worked most of the bugs out to where, okay, we can get to 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 miles without a critical failure that, leaves you with a huge repair bill. But yeah, they did. It was just people kind of skirted around the problem until the problem was figured out.
With it's interesting you brought up the mileage because I really was curious about this. Say a pre '07 semi truck, what kind of life or mileage interval would be average between, say, a major failure where it would have to be overhauled or worked on compared to the newer trucks with the DPF?
So the pre-emissions, there was that was really the defining, like most trucks, that was the defining factor of you did your maintenance right, and you could go. I've seen rigs that had an in-frame rebuild at 650,000 miles, multiple rigs. There's plenty of them out there that they had to replace some parts, they had to do some minor stuff, but they didn't need a full rebuild or turbo or things like that for 4 to 600,000 miles. And then there's a handful, but it's a pretty big handful that are running 1,000,001, 1,000,002 original stock parts that they just wore out. That was the problem, is they actually wore out, that didn't break. And then once the emission systems came in, that was really cut down to a lot of rigs ended up with after the growing pains period,
Yeah.
2007 to 2009 or so. They really um, they really on average they run about 300 to 400,000 now on an outside before they end up getting an in-frame rebuild or having to get new sleeves, things like that. And it also kind of depends on the manufacturer. So Volvo didn't come into the picture till about 10 years ago, 2010 or so, 2007, right after the emissions came in. And but then you still had the Cummins, and then PACCAR started putting their motors out after Caterpillar quit the road market. And as much as people crap on the CX-15s, they were the kind of the gold standard during the emissions mid-emissions era, 2008, 9 to about 2014, and they started changing to some fuel mapping and had problems. And they it is kind of broken down in the engine manufacturer. Cummins, they still had a solid 400 to 500,000 miles on them before they started looking at serious work. PACCAR worked out a lot of their bugs by about 2014 or so. 2014 was one of the kind of shifts where they went to much more complex and detailed fuel mapping and emissions controls. They kind of shifted fully into the electronic stage. And then Volvo came on the scene right after the emissions change. And there's not a lot of rigs that have hit that yet. Most of them are still about 400 or 500,000 miles from the original. Most of them are deleted at this point in that age range. But yeah, the pre-rebuild mileage has gone down significantly since the emissions. And I think we hit the rock bottom about 2018, 2019, and they broke over into being able to have enough technology to partner with the DPF system. Once you still have your sensor and actual post filtration system that has problems, but they've been able to work kind of like, as much as I don't like Ford, they did a really good job with the 6.7
Yeah.
in working out the bugs, making it extremely efficient with the power. Even though it's complicated, they worked out some of the reliability problems. So yeah.
Would you say now, where would the state of these trucks be in 2022? Have they, you had talked about kind of the rock bottom, point and the evolution of it over, 11 years or so. Has, what do people in that field think about these trucks, the mechanics, the operators? Do they see, what kind of future do they see for them? Because I imagine everything is so calculated with costs, with fuel, with downtime, with repairs, with all those sorts of things where, like for myself, if my truck was down, it's a headache, it's a pain. I'm going to want it to run, but I'm not necessarily losing tens of thousands or six figures when they're down. It's just,
Yeah.
it's kind of a headache. So,
Yeah. The that's what's interesting is to talking with drivers and shop owners and mechanics. It's kind of a mixed bag because you have old gear jammers that are like, These ones are nice. Yeah, you couldn't get as much miles out of them, but they're comfortable, they're quiet, they have air conditioning, and there's a surprising amount that once that are becoming company drivers and kind of shifting over into not just on, on their personal side, but enjoying the some of the things that the old school trucks didn't have. On the flip side, most of the mechanics I talk to rather work on old school stuff, simplicity, and you can point to the problem for the most part. But on the other hand, emission systems is where they make money,
Yeah.
a lot of it. And the I think where we're at today is we're in a kind of a lull in terms of moving forward with technology and kind of, we had several major breakthroughs in early 2000s late 90s, early 2000s when they changed from pure mechanical to electrical. And then they changed, late 2000s to a lot more computer programming and self-learning computers. And then and now we have all of the collision mitigation systems, the LiDAR, the adaptive cruise control, the super cruise, and a lot of that is a it's mind blowing to the older gearheads that are used to the long nose Pete's and the W9s, but in most people don't like it. But when it comes to the safety aspect, we have crazy people on the road,
Yeah.
let's be honest. And some of these systems have shown to help fill the gap in human error. And that's kind of where we're at right now, is kind of perfecting that augmented reality type of view and ability to not replace the human, not replace the ability of the drivers, but to expand their ability and maintain the uh the safety aspect and keeping deadly wrecks from happening. So that's kind of where we're at currently, is this lull of we've reached the peak of technology for the most part until we find the next one, which most of the researchers and labs they're looking 4 or 5 decades out from now. And they're like, that's kind of where we're at of before anything new comes on the scene at this point. Most of that time is going to be fine tuning and better programming. They're wanting to integrate AI into the computer systems. Take that as people will. Sometimes, AI is good, but there's a couple movies out there that you're like, I don't know.
I always think of Terminator with Skynet and everything else, but
Yep,
what
yep.
what's really cool is you're a diesel truck enthusiast and you're an operator. So if you were to compare the two of where they're at right now, would you say that big rigs are about equal with where pickup trucks are at? Are they farther ahead? Um, how do they compare as far as the emission systems, the longevity, the reliability as they sit in 2022?
They're they're a little bit farther ahead. You have the 2022, 2023 uh Sierras, and I think some of the Fords have it as well. They have the Super Cruise or the drive assist. We've had that for a couple of years now. Um, in terms of efficiency, we've got the big rig side had gotten kind of sloppy with some of their ideas, and then I think there's the big rigs are a little bit farther ahead, but not by much. Definitely, the last couple of years, the light duty trucks have been closing the gap. That's for sure.
I think one of the
And
challenges too is when you were talking about the old school, like the mechanics, and they like working on the pre-emission
yeah,
stuff, but what the new ones have, I think it's kind of the same thing for a potential truck owner. Is you say you want to find a 03 to 0759 or an older Duramax or Power Stroke or something like that. You can have the simplicity, but the
yeah,
new ones are so packed with features and tow ratings and
right,
payload and all these things that I think
yeah,
it's kind of difficult to pick between the two. You almost need one of each, but I think that's really the kind of the selling point of the newer trucks, like a 2022, 2023, is I have new styling, I have great interior, I've got a touchscreen, I've got all these features. If I want to take the family camping or something, go on a road trip, I like having this versus my '01 LB7 or my '03 59 that might not have it. So I can see how that's kind of a similarity that both
right.
groups might face. One question I did think of asking you, because I've seen this in the news recently, is with electric semi trucks. And I heard Elon Musk talking about it. What what do you think of those? Like,
Yeah.
is that something that's viable? Is it something that in your industry people are resistant to, or are they thinking this might potentially work, in the future, or this could save us operating costs or downtime or mileage, or what's kind of the prevailing winds, on your side when it comes to EVs?
Yeah, so um EV trucks, they've been they've been in the in-town services for about a year and a half now, almost two. You're talking, yard dogs or LTL freight, the day cabs that run with the short little trailers going from business to business. They've been doing that for about a year and a half now. Um, that's where the viability is. Short range, no tailpipe emissions, um, instant power, kind of what they're all looking for in the metropolitan downtown type of type of usage. In terms of long range, running cross country or cross state even, not really. The technology isn't there yet. They're looking at the most they've been able to reliably get out of a all electric vehicle is about 200 miles, and that's with a significant cut in payload because batteries are heavy. They're
Yeah.
they're a lot more heavy than a conventional drivetrain. Um, there's been some real big steps towards integration with alternative fuels, like natural gas, propane type of thing, or like I call it junk juice. They mix kind of the after products of the petroleum refining um, processes, and they overhaul existing motors to take it. Same thing with the liquid natural gas or the compressed. They retrofit. The Cummins is currently the leader in that, and that's kind of where whether the media and the talking heads say or not, alternative fuels is really where the market's heading over electric for now, because the availability, because of the lack of infrastructure, because of the sheer weight that EVs require to maintain their range and power. Um, so there's a lot of the drivers, they're really, they don't want to see diesel go. But we won't see it for a long time become any less necessary because of alternative fuels or because of EVs. Just we've been running diesel for so long, and it's going to run for a lot longer just because the technology hasn't reached the ability to replace it. And as a kind of a side note with that, the sheer cost of an EV truck is currently about triple of a brand new rig. The rig I'm in is a 2022 International. It cost about 220,000. Current price for an EV is about 550 to 600,000 per unit. So kind of on top of all the other roadblocks, you have the price point that
Yeah.
is a big stumbling block.
Well, it's tough because I like to follow all different sides of automotive. Diesel is my main interest and passion, but I do follow EVs. I follow really everything, and I understand that
Yeah,
innovation and creativity and thinking ahead 10 years, 20 years, 30 years is so important. And
yeah,
real innovators, in any field, they do that. And so I see the F-150 Lightning. I know GM's got their electric truck, and there's more and more coming
yeah,
out. But when I think about the usability of it, I come back to the infrastructure. I come back to the ability to be able to
yeah.
plug in millions of vehicles, and it's just not quite there. So the next thing I think about, like you mentioned, was alternative fuels or hybrid technologies or something like that, where you can almost bridge the gap. And for someone who's using their truck for work, they might be able to get some benefits from it. It might not be that complete just jump from an internal combustion engine to a series of motors on a vehicle, and then where do you stop? Where's the stations at? Can the power plants supply enough energy for it? And where are they spaced out? It just seems
Yep,
like the push for it is just a little bit too soon, or it's not realistic because of the infrastructure.
for sure. Yeah, that's the leading one of the leading kind of debate points for the EV push is getting getting the sheer amount of power, let alone distributing it and being able to dispense it, is just astronomical in the scope of things. And like California passed that stupid bill that you can't sell or buy, regular gas vehicles after, I think, 2025, something like that. All the people actually working on the ground and in the infrastructure and trying to figure it out, they're like, you're gonna pull some magic or something because it's not happening. It really is a pie in the sky idea for a foreseeable future.
Yeah.
Definitely, we're looking at a solid 10 or 15 years before it can even be considered cross state, let alone cross country.
Yeah, it's a conversation that it's interesting to hear how it exists in that side as well as the pickup truck side. And we were talking a little bit before the podcast, and I'd mentioned the new Tundra with its V6
Yep.
turboed hybrid, and it caught my attention with something. And I was looking at the torque numbers. And I thought, if we were to rewind 25 years, 30
Yeah.
years, I mean, that's like, I don't remember the exact number it made, but it was up there, compared to an older diesel truck. And it got me thinking at one point about what can we do on the diesel side? Is that the future of it? Is it some sort of diesel electric hybrid? And I wanted to ask you about semi trucks and the heavy duty market. Is what do you think would be that gap, or bridging, maybe not even bridging, but being the future, so to speak, Is some sort of
Yeah,
hybrid technology like that something that you think would be viable?
it definitely is. It's kind of goes back to the adage of old is new, kind of like with the turbo episode, uh, 2 or 3 episodes ago.
Yeah.
Old is coming back. They've been running diesel electric. They have it in trains, they have it in logging equipment, they have it in heavy duty off road equipment. Hasn't really gone away. But there's a company out of Canada called Edison Motors that they're developing both their first project is creating a diesel electric system for big rigs. They start with off-road vocational, um, pipe trucks, logging trucks, things like that. And then they're going to shift into the street market, and then eventually into like a 5-ton service truck industry, like the Holt Cat service trucks. And it comes with there's really no downsides besides a little bit of weight gain. So what they're doing is that they're taking a gen set, like an Onan gen set with, I think it's a 4-cylinder Cummins, and depending on the power output, depends on the size of the generator. They're dropping that in instead of what's in the trucks, the CX-15, the PACCAR motors, and then they're running it to the biggest electric motor they can find that fits in the truck. But that eliminates the transmission, it eliminates the DPF system because they're not on-road motors, and it decreases the overall weight of the motor. So all combined, you end up with about a 400-pound gain in total drivetrain weight. But what you benefit from is the instant torque, instant power, instant acceleration of the electric motors. They ran it on the dyno, and it's equivalent to the 2023 PACCAR motor. Like on the maximum power output, they're looking at about 650 horses, and then on average torque, they're looking at about 1,500 foot-pounds. But what the real benefit is that you don't have to you gain in fuel savings because you're no longer running you're not running the motor every single moment that you're going down the road. It's only running to recharge the batteries, or you want to go into something similar to overdrive where you got to power up a hill type of thing. So you gain fuel savings by that. You gain longevity because electric motors just take less maintenance. They last longer than like a conventional transmission. Less maintenance, longer lifespan. And then you also stretch out the lifespan of your diesel generator because it's not running 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. So you have less maintenance, less repairs, less fuel consumption. And then to add it all together, it's much more efficient per unit of output. So you consume less fuel and less oil compared to my truck, for example, per horsepower, per foot-pound of torque, per mile. And to throw icing on that, they're not that expensive. Currently, they're looking at about $35,000 to $40,000 for a retrofit kit. That's essentially a drop-in kit, and that costs about as much as a drivetrain rebuild.
Now, is
So
like with pickup trucks, I've had some guests on. We've talked about it's been more phrased around racing, but like the
yeah,
RPM Act, what can you make a race vehicle? Can you run a different engine than what the VIN number said it had from the factory? Are these, say, that example that you gave, and in that segment, is it different, or is it not such a big deal? Say if you were to take a whenever this is available to buy and install, take a 2020 model, put this diesel hybrid electric engine in it. Is that good to go to all 50 states with, or is it kind of that gray area like with pickup trucks and race vehicles and
So
what you can do?
yeah, so it's a good question, and it's a hard answer since it's kind of pushing through the curtain. There isn't much that has happened on road since
Yeah,
the 70s, and currently the there is no legal problems because thankfully some of the way the EPA regulations are written and kind of the supporting laws on mismatching motors to trucks and things like that, it's pretty loose. So as long as it matches the rating of the motor, the manufactured rating of the motor is really the only defining factor. So like the gens that they use is EPA compliant in its usage, in all of its adjustments. So they don't have a problem putting it on road because kind of a loophole is that it's not the primary drive of the axles. The electric motor is. So there's a loophole in the regulations that someone found that if the motor that drives the wheels is it that's what makes the emissions tied to the operation of being on the roadway.
gotcha.
So it might be confusing, but yeah, basically they can get around that because the electric motor is the drive motor, not the genset.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think one of the things that I've seen it pop up on YouTube comments before with emissions episodes, and or even just talking about like how much more reliable the newer trucks are than like an '08 or '07 and a half.
Hmm.
Something guys will say is, yeah, but it doesn't have the sound. And I don't know if it's necessarily like that with, semi trucks, but as a diesel enthusiast, you mentioned having a 12 valve. They have a distinct sound. They sound great. I mean,
Yeah,
I love how they sound. Pretty
yeah,
much all 5.9s, I like how they sound. But it's so hard, I think, to say, hey, here's this, we're looking in the future a little bit. I don't know when it would be,
yeah,
but here's your diesel electric, nearly silent pickup truck. And you have that enthusiast part of, you know, loving diesel where you're like, I want to hear the exhaust, whether it's a Duramax, a Power Stroke,
yeah,
a Cummins.
yeah,
And I haven't thought of a way you could ever bridge that gap because you can have the creature comforts, a nice interior, the safety features, more torque, more horsepower. But if you don't hear anything, it's like we miss
yeah.
that connection to, the automobile, the truck, the road, everything.
For sure. Yeah, that's probably the biggest downside of that type of system is the little kid in all of us goes, I want to hear it when I
Yeah.
stomp on the pedal.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's definitely a strange thing to notice. And one of the good thing is that with the hybrid electrics, you can get that sometimes. They do have an override switch on the dash. You can switch and it'll constantly run. You just won't hear it when you hit the throttle. So yeah, yeah.
Well,
The good
it's
thing is though, the good thing is when you ain't having a great day, when they run quiet, your head's pounding. It's kind of nice not to have that sound in the background.
oh yeah. Yeah, it definitely. I went on a few road trips with a straight piped Cummins, and it's like great around town, but once you get cruising on the highway and you hear that drone for 2 or 3 hours, it's like
Yep,
I just need a little bit of quiet for a little bit. But yeah,
exactly. Yeah, yep.
that was it's really cool to chat with you and get this insight because I get so focused on pickup trucks and I get so
Yeah,
kind of focused around those topics, and sometimes it can be overwhelming, and we think, man, the emission systems are just going to kill the trucks. We're just kind of languishing around. There's no innovation with it. We just got to sacrifice longevity, fuel economy, everything else. And then eventually, one of the big three is going to have a 3/4 1 ton electric truck. And there goes, all my fun. I get 100 miles, maybe tops, towing. And that's the end of it. But with, I think with semi trucks, with transportation, it is so crucial. We hear a lot about it in the news now with diesel fuel reserves and the price of fuel and how connected that is to our everyday way of life. A grocery store, any store we go to, things we get delivered.
yeah,
It's it's of such importance that when you had mentioned doing this podcast, I was really excited because I think the innovation is going to start there. It has to start there because there's 300 million
sure.
people that depend on it in
Yeah,
one way or another. So me as, diesel pickup truck enthusiast, podcast host, it makes me excited to hear about these technologies, no matter what company it's coming from and what they're doing, to say, okay,
yeah,
there are some things being worked on. There are some things that are really cool. Maybe the
yeah,
DPF and emission systems don't have to be as aggressive because there's these other technologies. Um, it kind of
sure.
gives us a little bit of hope for it. So it was really cool to hear,
Yeah,
your experience and your insights on it.
for sure. Yeah, something, and kind of as a side note, um, some of the things, some of the new programs that have been developed for the new trucks for skirting the law purposes with DPS systems. They've become so on point and fine tuned. You couldn't tell the difference in between a stock emissions truck and a fully deleted, straight piped, you know, identical twin that's been deleted and reprogrammed in terms of emissions. That's how far we've come from 2007 when you had critical failures in the DPF systems versus now the the technology has caught up with the demand for cleaner running trucks, higher efficiency trucks, that we're slowly getting to the point where we're going, what do we need the EPA for? What do we need these regulations for? The market has reached the point that we can satisfy the demands for good, reliable running trucks that have a highly efficient system in them. And that's kind of the question we need to ask, is that what can we do to reach that point to go, we don't need the EPA anymore. The market has created the replacement and demand for it. So, you know, can we can we abolish the EPA? We have no longer need them. That's really kind of the question, I think a lot of people need to ask is, what can we do? What
Yeah.
can we create to benefit the market and the customers?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. There was a guest who had mentioned or was talking about sports cars or muscle cars, like the late 70s, early 80s. I think he brought up a Corvette, and I don't
Yeah,
remember how much power they made, 180, 210 horsepower, whatever it is.
yeah,
Because the
yeah,
technology wasn't there for the emission standards of the day, they had to cut the power back. And you look at them now, and they're 800 horsepower, and they have everything on
right.
it. And so the technology, or like you mentioned, where the market said, "Hey, we can meet your standards, and we can add 600 horsepower to it or 500 horsepower, and you get all these
Yep.
creature comforts, and you have all these things, and you have a warranty, and you have all this stuff. The market led the way, and I think that's what's really exciting, because it feels like the last 15 years has been the opposite way of, here's your emission standards, meet them. This is just my personal opinion. I don't think
Yeah.
the technology was there, but they, the big three did what they had to do to have it meet
Right.
it, and then we all kind of beta tested it with our O2 sensors, our DPFs, our EGR valves, and
Yep.
check engine lights and everything else. But now it feels like it's primed to just leap forward ahead in a way that the EPA doesn't have to police it as much, because it's, I
Yeah.
don't want to say policed
Yeah.
itself, but it's just evolved enough to where it's like we make more power, more torque.
Exactly.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it could be considered that they realize that, their usefulness is coming to an end, and it could be theorized that's why they're, really cracking down on performance shops and people that are doing aftermarket work, is maybe they're feeling insecure now. I don't know. It's it's a possibility.
It is. It is. Well, I mean, I appreciate you reaching out to us, Christopher, sharing, your experience, your insights. I appreciate you listening to the podcast, and, keep us updated. Stay in touch with us. Let us know, things or new technologies or new stuff that's happening on that side, because I know, there's some listeners we have where they're in both parts of diesel. They're in the heavy duty market, and they drive,
Sure.
a Duramax, a Cummins, a Power Stroke, and they love it. And so I think being able to bridge those two, and them kind of feeding off each other a little bit, and understanding
For sure.
what you guys are doing, what you guys are seeing, helps us as
Yeah, for sure.
people driving pickup trucks. So
Yeah.
again, I appreciate you reaching out, taking time today to chat with us and cover this important topic.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Glad I could. It's a lot of fun getting new information out there, and you know learning something along the way as well. So it's great.
Don't forget, diesel fans, make sure and head on over to kershaw.kiausa.com. If you're in the market for a knife, use code diesel20, get 20% off site wide. It's a great way to save some money if you need something for EDC or hunting, fishing, something around the house, outdoors. I know a lot of you guys have taken advantage of it, and it's a great way to save some money. So we appreciate our friends over there offering that discount code for you guys. Also want to give a shout out to some of our Patreon supporters, Tyler Loewen of 23 Diesel, also Kaleb, all of our other Patreon supporters, all of you who subscribe on YouTube, podcast apps, our Instagram, Facebook page. We appreciate all the support you guys have given us over the years. And, like, for example, this week you got us into the top 10 on iTunes Automotive, which is a big feat to do. Most of the podcasts aren't diesel. They're about gas, electric, racing, things like that. And we peaked at number 7. We're at number 8, the day before. So we appreciate the support you guys give us by listening, sharing the podcast with your friends, joining our Discord, chatting with us about your truck builds, giving us suggestions for, episodes and things like that. We love hearing from you guys. Until next time, keep the shiny side up.